Make a little device, really small device that actually clips onto your belt and call it a dangleberry. But anyway,
I
moving
think
on.
now we shall move away from the whole topic of RIM and right, Gordon or Roy, has anybody got another article they want to throw in? Preferably without those topics being mentioned and preferably without phones being mentioned. Gordy, have you got a topic for us?
Right, I've got one. Right, this is XFCE. XFCE 4.8 has been released. A disclaimer: I am an XFCE user. It's my preferred environment. I don't download the latest versions. I just wait until the distribution that I'm using happens to update it, and it'll come down with my regular updates. A lot of the updates with XFCE do seem to be kind of logical. There's nothing show-stopping in any of these releases. They're just sort of logical improvements that you don't really think you need until you start using them. But it wasn't so much the features that caught my eye with the announcement. It was the wording on the announcement. Something I'd never even thought of. And apparently, what they said was, this is basically, they're taking this point to announce a concern that they've had for a while about Linux-only improvements or Linux-only features to XFCE. Now, XFCE is a full free software project. I believe it's GPL'd, although I could be wrong. So, I mean, as far as I was aware, XFCE would be the same regardless of whether it's on Ubuntu or Debian or Fedora or FreeBSD, NetBSD, whatever. I never really assumed there would be a difference until this announcement, and they made that time to say, look, we don't really like the way this is going. The fact that there are Linux only stuff. So I'm assuming it's got something to do with the licensing. I've got to assume it's something to do with the licensing. That there's no technical reason why these changes and these improvements can't go into BSD. So that was one that caught my eye.
Which BSD actually comes with this desktop? I'm just wondering because I cannot think of one.
I don't know.
I mean, sure, you could install it if you wanted to, but I don't really think any of them is actually truly based. I have about 10 versions in mind. Mostly based on GNOME, to be honest. The main one based on KDE is desktop based.
PCBSD?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one based on KDE 4. I can't think of any of. Some of them are basically very minimalist environments as well because they're used to things like routers and whatever. But I can't think of one which is XFCE.
Even XFCE, even if it's not the default environment in any of these, I just assumed that it would be like any other environment. It would be essentially like a Linux distribution to all intents and purposes. That you can download it and then say, right, I want to put OpenBox, I want to install OpenBox, or I want to install LXDE or whatever. I just assumed that would be the case, and you would get the same feature set as you would get from Linux. I was just kind of surprised to see that there's Linux-only features.
Well, the last time I used XFCE, which I was very impressed with, it was when I was running Wolvix. And I moved on from that, I think, about 2008, 2009. But I do keep meaning to check back on it, so maybe this new version will be the kick up the rear to go and check it out. So the links for that will be on the show notes, but I'm sure anybody with an ounce of savvy will be able to find a link to XFCE somewhere, but it'll be on the show notes.
I believe it's xfce.org if I remember correctly, yeah. But carry on.
Right, sorry, Roy, do you want to bring up another topic, or do you have something to add?
Well, now we have a sort of a new one, that's Unity. Now, of course, Unity is not a complete desktop environment, but if you actually think about it, these days you can actually break them down into components and get quite a few of the main features whose purpose is to run your applications and to allow you to access the open sessions or to move between desktops and all that sort of stuff. So here you have this, XFCE hasn't been developed a great deal in recent years, but it still has the latest versions of Firefox and things like that, and that works fine. And I'm quite not concerned, but I've been reading a lot about Unity recently, and of course Unity kind of replaces most of just anything that's to do with the shell in GNOME 3. There is a new website now for GNOME 3. I think it's GNOME3.org. That's a really nice website. It shows you in a very nice, rich visual way what it's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be structured. But the thing with Unity now, everyone's debating the need for 3D acceleration to get the most out of the desktop in terms of features, in terms of visual effects, things like that, and they work and fallback for 2D. And I think we spoke about this in the previous show. But people now complain about Canonical trying to require that you have certain bits of hardware just to run the desktop. Of course, you could actually fall back or use something like GNOME 3 if you wanted to from the repositories. And quite a few people who use that. To be fair and to be honest here, I barely find anybody who likes it so far. But then again, it's an alpha version, so maybe they will even decide to call off the thing until 11.10. Who knows? But it's kind of a big gamble, and with all kinds of people leaving Canonical now, some fairly senior people, I'm kind of thinking maybe Fedora or some distro is going to take over in some sense. Of course, Google is a big giant player in this field, especially with Chrome OS and things like Android improving a great deal also to accommodate things like netbooks or tablets, and then that's going to be an interesting place to watch.
Yeah, I think Fedora's position with Unity does seem to be the more sensible one. From what I've picked up, I've not tried Unity yet. I've seen the odd video on YouTube and stuff, but I mean, as you say, it is alpha. But as from Canonical are saying it's going to be the default desktop in 11.04. I think that's crazy. That's way too soon.
It's still
Yeah, Fedora, from what I'm aware, Fedora have said, right, we're going to adopt it. It's going to be in the repositories, but it will not be the default. If you choose it, it's there for you. But the default's still going to be regular GNOME. I think that's far more sensible, especially at such an early stage. And something that's that major, like your environment. I mean, the environment is what the user interacts with. And if that is flaky, if that breaks, if it's buggy, that's going to give a huge first impression, a really bad first impression of that distribution. And a lot of people, a lot of new users might have flirted with like Ubuntu or whatever in the past, and just kept going back to Windows, and then they eventually decide at 11.04 that's the time that they're going to come to Linux, and when they say, right, I've finally built up the courage, built up the confidence to try this Linux thing, and the first thing they do is get onto Ubuntu Unity, and it's a bit crashy. It's not a good first impression. But on the other hand, I do understand where Canonical are coming from. If they're saying that we're targeting newer hardware, then I can sort of understand that, because when it comes to the point, I mean, my desktop's old. It's a Pentium 4. It's an old desktop. I fully expect that my hardware is going to get left behind in the modern distributions. I'd have no problem with that. It's unfortunate for me because I'm going to have to either switch down to a lighter distribution, which I have done with Debian, switch down to a lighter environment, which I have done with XFCE, or find the money to buy a new computer. That's my problem. But I do understand where they're coming from, and that they don't want to be held back by constantly having to support really, really old hardware. So I do get where they're coming from on that.
I take a slightly different view. I mean, I don't want to say being a champion of Ubuntu, because that would sound like I'm far more involved than I am. But I've certainly, whenever I've deployed Linux, 9 times out of 10 it's been Ubuntu. And I think every time Canonical makes a rather big decision, there's a lot of people